Halloween season is upon us, and what better way to celebrate it than to explore the darker side of the Half-Life universe? We all know the horrors of the creation of a Stalker, the drawn-out transformation of Jeff, and the devastating bond between a headcrab and its host. I covered those in my first collection of terrible fates, but what else is there to be terrified of in this universe? The answer is plenty. There are absolutely fates worse than death, existences of torment and helplessness. Tonight, we look at more of these in detail. What is the worst fate in the Half-Life universe? What makes one experience worse than another? And would you rank these in the same order as I have? In this video, we explore another collection of terrible fates in the Half-Life universe. Many awful things happened to the population of Earth during the course of the Half-Life series, but we all have our own subjective opinions about what makes one experience worse than another, based on several psychological and physical factors. This is my interpretation and viewpoint of the worst possible things that could happen to someone, in order of severity. We begin with something fairly horrific but glossed over frequently in the timeline. Following the breakthrough of teleportation technology and the discovery of the border world of Xen, the Black Mesa Research Facility wanted to explore this dimension. To do this, a survey team was established in order to study the environment, the flora and fauna. This series of floating islands was nothing like Earth and abided by its own rules. The First Expedition of Xen would have consisted of a group of specially selected scientists whose job it was to report anything they found back to Black Mesa, but even they could not have prepared for what they found. Every step offered the opportunity of a unique death, as the humans would have encountered the extremely hostile wildlife and plant life that had also found their way to Xen as the border world had crossed paths with their worlds. The bodies of the first expedition soon littered the landscape, each claimed by Xen in its own way. Some were never found at all. Deep in the caves, surveyors setting up their equipment drew the attention of barnacles lurking above. Before they could react, a slimy, sticky tongue had already coiled around them, hauling them upwards towards a gaping mouth waiting to devour them alive. Headcrabs wandered away from their gonarch and discovered that humans were the perfect hosts to merge with. Nearby, strange trees that might have offered valuable insight into how plant life grew on Xen lashed out at anyone who ventured too close. From the darkest pits, tentacles emerged to drag the unwary down into the depths. Ichthyosaurs, houndeyes, vortigauns, and countless other creatures that called Xen home attacked anything unfamiliar on sight. To them, the intruders were an unwelcome presence in their territory. In my opinion, the worst way to die was introduced in the Black Mesa remake, the underwater barnacle. It latched onto its prey as they swam, dragged them down, and devoured them alive as they drowned. The true horror was that the first expedition had no idea what awaited them on the floating islands of Xen. The data they gathered was indeed valuable, but not to them. Black Mesa used their findings only to ensure that the next group sent through would avoid meeting the same fate. For all we know, some members of the first human expedition to Xen might have survived, stranded there and forced to adapt to the alien world, cut off and isolated from everything they once knew. We may never know the full story of the first expedition of Xen, but whatever happened, it must have been terrifying. Few deaths are worse than being eaten alive, yet I believe psychological torment is every bit as horrific. Following the Combine invasion, the new regime imposed a system that demanded absolute obedience and punished those who defied severely. Humans were transported like cattle to cities governed and monitored by the Combine. Within this system, some were recruited into the Civil Protection, serving as enforcers of the regime's rules against their own kind. The terrible fate is that of the life of a regular citizen, a life of constant paranoia and fear. Those who volunteered as members of the Civil Protection participated behind a mask of anonymity. A resident of an apartment block never knew if their friends or neighbors were truly aligned with the Combine agenda or had thoughts of resistance. The system established by the Combine offered secret rewards to those who provided information about anyone daring to challenge the regime. Random raids targeted those suspected of resistance activity, and anyone found to possess intelligence or ties to hidden resistance groups were interrogated, or worse, transformed into a stalker. In a society where food, water, and even social interaction were tightly controlled and offered only as rewards for compliance, a single wrong word could bring suffering, while betraying others offered a brief release from constant tension. Prolonged stress has a heavy toll on the body, bringing headaches, exhaustion, feverish sweats, and a growing weakness to disease, just to name a few. The life of a citizen in a Combine-controlled city was one of constant overthinking, internal editing, and a pure lack of trust. One wrong glance, one wrong word, or one wrong step could lead to a beating, detainment, or a one-way trip to Nova Prospect. An existence of complete helplessness and fear. Through their exploration of the multiverse, the Combine encountered many species that they conquered, captured, and brutally adapted into living weapons and tools for their ever-growing army. When the Combine Empire discovered the Vortigaunt homeworld, however, the species narrowly escaped through a rift into the border world of Xen. The Vortigaunt were unlike any species the Combine had encountered before, and sometime later, after the Resonance Cascade and the invasion of Earth, the two crossed paths once again. The Vortigaunts had a natural connection to something they called the Vortessence, a tapestry of vortal threads woven through space and time. They could harness it to unleash deadly energy, teleport, manipulate time, and even see into the future. The Combine saw the potential of this connection and wanted to integrate the energy of the Vortessence into their army, but it could only be accessed by the Vortigaunt. Having conquered Earth, they captured every Vortigaunt they discovered and even distributed propaganda to urge the scared population to report the Vort. Through their nightmarish experimentation on the biology of the captured Vortigaunts, the Combine could not find a way to reverse engineer a technical connection to the Vortessence with adapted machinery. So, they created devices to imprison the Vortigaunts to turn them into living batteries instead. Scattered throughout the quarantine zone, pods were placed containing restrained Vortigaunts, kept alive in darkness while the machinery around them drained the Vortessence that flowed through their bodies. All they could do was reach out through the veil, communicating with others of their kind through a psychic network. Their physical forms trapped in confinement as their essence was forcibly drained. This fate mirrors some of the atrocities of the Strogg in Quake in a sense, but I will admit, Quake was so much worse. The thought of being detained in such an enclosed space and used to power machinery is such an uncomfortable thought. While alone in person, at least they still had a connection to the others who were trapped, a fate of being conscious but truly powerless. The tale of Gary the Vortigaunt is just sad. I would say his story is similar to Doug Ratman of Portal. Doug lost his connection to reality, Gary lost his connection to everyone. Just like the rest of his kind, Gary escaped the Nylanth rule after the Resonance Cascade, only to be captured by the Combine upon reaching Earth. He was among the unfortunate Vortigaunts chosen for experimentation, as the Combine sought to understand how his species accessed the Vortessence. Gary was branded, restrained, and examined in depth as the Combine cut open his head to see how the receptors that access the Vortessence functioned, during which he suffered a brain injury, and then everything went quiet. The vortal threads of the Vortessence were loud, a constant hum that connected every Vortigaunt together across space and time, but his injury silenced it. That one cruel wound severed him from the fabric, from the collective consciousness that bound his kind as one. For the first time in his existence, he was truly alone. Gary eventually escaped captivity and made a home for himself in the abandoned, hostile quarantine zone of City 17. Though his connection to the Vortessence had been severed, faint traces of it still lingered. He held on to memories of his homeworld, of Xen, of his people, and what was yet to come. With these fading fragments, Gary painted a mural before they slipped away, of friends, foes, and prepared to live out the rest of his days in isolation as his perception of the past, present, and future blended into one. The Vortigaunts were a highly social species, but without the ability to communicate with his kin or peer into the Vortessence, Gary had lost everything. While those used as living batteries were imprisoned physically, they still shared a connection with the others of their kind. Gary suffered the opposite fate, freedom without connection. The Combine had truly broken him. Psychological torment and isolation linger far longer than physical pain. There is something fairly uniquely horrifying about being trapped with your own thoughts and fears with no one left to bring you back to reality. The name Ravenholm is synonymous with terror. It stands as the creepiest chapter in Half-Life 2, but have you ever stopped to think about what the Resistance members and refugees went through during its fall? As Gordon Freeman, we only witnessed the aftermath. This mining town was once full of refugees and Resistance members who had escaped the oppressive regime of City 17. To get there, they would have traversed the Underground Railroad, a journey that not everyone survived. Anyway, as this town filled up, they each found their role and purpose in the Resistance. Black Mesa East was home to the leader of the Resistance, Dr. Eli Vance, and through a secret underground tunnel, refugees traveled between Ravenholm and the base. These people would have felt safe here, hidden away from the constant surveillance of the Combine, with their own freedom to say and do what they wanted following years of hardship. But this paradise did not last. At one point, the Combine became aware of the existence of Ravenholm and that it was home to a resistance group. With their focus on efficiency, the Combine did not send in units to wipe out those who defied their rule. They offered something far worse. It would have been a day like any other in Ravenholm, and then the shells fell. From them came waves of headcrabs of different varieties, normal, poison, and fast, whose natural instinct was to latch onto the heads of the panicked human population around them. The Resistance members would have defended who they could with their weaponry, but the refugees had no combat experience and simply became prey to the swarm. As every second passed, Ravenholm became more and more dangerous as the victims of the headcrabs bonded with their parasites and became zombies. Ravenholm was the perfect location for a resistance town because it was secluded and located next to a secret base, but this seclusion was a double-edged sword. When the survivors reached the tunnel that led to Black Mesa East, they found it sealed. Their leader believed the Combine had detected only the existence of Ravenholm, not Black Mesa East. In the chaos, he made a very difficult decision: to seal the tunnel and sacrifice the lives of those in Ravenholm so that his base and the Resistance could continue their work. As for the people in Ravenholm, they were slaughtered and overtaken one by one, having been sacrificed by the leader of the course that was meant to free them. Only one survivor is known of this tragic event, Father Gregory, and while he was able to defend himself well, he stayed in the town to free the people he had once seen as his congregation from the parasites that tortured them. This is a fate of betrayal, abandonment, and ultimately eternal torment from the headcrabs that kept their victim hosts alive. These humans could not control their own actions. All they could do was stand around in absolute agony, subjected to cosmic, physical, existential, and psychological horror all in one. This place was meant to be their sanctuary, but it became their tomb. It was well known that the regions beyond the Combine city walls had become an extremely hostile wasteland. But what was actually out there? The oceans had turned into breeding grounds for leeches, headcrabs roamed the land, and the most territorial and devastating of all were the antlions. This highly intelligent species had been pulled to Earth by the portal storms triggered by the Resonance Cascade. Without a way back to Xen, they made Earth their home. With a strong hierarchy and different castes, over time, each antlion played their role in the formation of nests deep underground. Complex, labyrinthine tunnels home to grubs, workers, guards, guardians, and soldiers. The tunnels themselves were cramped, sticky, twisted, and the deeper they went, the darker they got and the more protective the antlions became. Only the Vortigauns are known to have entered these nests willingly in search of antlion larvae, something that enhanced their connection to the Vortessence. But what about those who did not go willingly? We have explored the idea of becoming a living battery, being completely disconnected from an entire network and living in isolation. But this fate makes me so uncomfortable to think about. Antlion soldiers were predominantly responsible for feeding their nest, and to do this, they hid just underground and waited for the vibrations of someone above. When they detected prey, they broke through the ground and killed what had dared to enter their territory. The majority of their targets would have died quickly and been brought back to the nests to feed, but what about those who did not die? This terrible fate is that of one of those. They would have regained consciousness, encased in silk, unable to move in the claustrophobic tunnels of a colony, stored away in preparation to be eaten. The worst part, the grubs of a colony were tiny, and if their meal was still alive, the person would have felt small chunks being ripped from them, piece by piece. All the while, the blood, bones, and remains of other victims stuck to the ground around them, and they would be one of them. I had always thought that being eaten by a barnacle was the worst way to go, but that would have been so much faster than this. The final fate in this collection is rooted in a merge of Half-Life 2 Episode 3, Epistle 3, and Breengrub. Now, Episode 3 was cancelled, but we do have concept art and a little information about what it would have entailed, while Epistle 3 and Breengrub were sort of fan creations of Mark Laidlaw, the writer for the series. The story is that while Dr. Wallace Breen met his demise after his fall from the top of the Citadel in City 17, his story was not over in a sense. Epistle 3 and Breengrub tell us that when the Combine encountered bright minds on the worlds they conquered, they had technology that allowed them to make copies of a person's state at that moment. This meant all of their memories, personality, and basically who they were up until that moment. Following the 7-hour war, Breen agreed to have his mind backed up frequently to the Combine system. This meant that when he was alive, different versions of him, snapshots, were stored away from different points in his life, post-Combine. The Breengrub Twitter account was one of these older snapshots imprinted onto a Shu'ulathoi, a giant slug. This snapshot of Breen was confused about what had happened and was completely unaware of the death of his original. His confusion turned to panic and fear of being watched and monitored. He was helpful at first and relayed information about the original species of the Combine Advisor, how the Combine grew them and imprinted minds on them, but these messages soon turned into Combine propaganda after they realized he was giving away information. This is clearly not canon, but an interesting view into the direction of Episode 3. Anyway, we know that Breengrub would have been in Episode 3 because of this concept art. If it were to be anything like Epistle 3, Gordon would have met a broken Wallace Breen in the mind of a slug, nervous and terrified of everything. He knew Gordon had been responsible for the death of his original, and although he had been loyal to the Combine, he had become their prisoner in this form. The horror of this fate is that Breen had lost all autonomy, power, and was reduced to a slug under the control of the Combine, his only value being his bright mind. You can see the pain and grotesque form he had become in this concept art. Body horror, along with isolation, is just brutal, and desperate to escape this tragic existence, Breen asked Freeman to put an end to his life, to be put at rest. Wallace Breen was responsible for so many abhorrent actions in the Half-Life series. This version may not have even been aware of a ton of them, but did he deserve this? I am currently preparing for the big timeline I do every year, and with it being around Halloween, I thought it was the perfect time to explore the darker side of Half-Life with a slightly smaller video. There were a few things I wanted to add in this list, but could not because of how small they were. Things like how we know Xenian creatures were displaced during the portal storms, and I thought about what if these portals went the other way too? If someone was just cooking a nice microwave casserole in their kitchen, and the next moment they had landed in Xen. I will always mention Adrian Shepard and his fate of perpetual stasis, and even the idea that humanity somehow discovered there was a universe in which Aperture Science purchased Black Mesa and stopped the resonance cascade from happening at all. That they were the unlucky ones in the entire multiverse who were invaded by the Combine. It is always great to explore Half-Life and think about what could have been. I also love Halloween and wanted an excuse to make something like this. That was everything I wanted to say in this collection of terrible fates. While some of them are absolutely horrifying, it was fun to explore this universe. If you enjoyed this, consider subscribing to the channel. If you enjoyed the video, then feel free to leave a like. If you did not, then let me know why in the comments and drop a dislike. I also have some gold tier patrons and channel members to thank for your constant support. Queen Arby, Lewis, Oren X, Drakey Phoenix, Dano Cal Drawings, 501st Clone Boy, Ruben Mendoza, Imperial Embers, Canifex, Jimsy, Average Soul, Azu, Jonas, Yali Rodriguez, Detroit, Motzi, Brina Lee, Jacqueline Lavelle, King Jack, Lifeblood, Reaper Gaming, Mamet, Kaidazin, and Zuni115. What is your terrible fate in the Half-Life series? Do you agree with my order? And what would you like me to cover next? Let me know in the comments below. this is where our story ends. Check back soon for a new one.